It's amazing how over the centuries humans have continued to progress in terms of like inventions and technical achievements. And one of the greatest parts about these technical achievements is that they often make uncomfortable things and situations more comfortable. For example, for the vast majority of human history, we have not had great ways to get cold or cool down. Oftentimes you have to travel somewhere else to get somewhere cool. But we've never really had much way to stabilize cool temperatures on a moment's notice until 1902, when the first air conditioning unit was invented. And that invention, that creation, transformed everything that we know today. Pretty quickly over the course of the 20th century, air conditioning units became more and more efficient and more accessible to where they were being placed in businesses, in homes, even in vehicles. And now you really, especially in the United States, we have access to air conditioned units and air conditioning at any time, effectively, and the world is better for it, okay? I mean, for many of you, you may have grown up in a time where you saw the development and accessibility of air conditioning becoming more and more available. But for someone like me, I have never really had to deal with that. I've been very blessed to have lived and grown up in a society that has air conditioning units. The closest I've gotten is whenever my dad had an old beat up van where the AC stopped working and we were driving around in the middle of the summer, and after 10 minutes you start sweating bullets because even with the windows open you just can't get cold. Like, that's the closest thing I've gotten. I'm so thankful for things like air conditioning units that bring a lot of comfort in uncomfortable worlds. And I think the reason that we as humans strive to invent things like that is because we crave comfort. We crave being more and more comfortable, especially when we are in situations that are uncomfortable. That's true not just about physical discomfort, but it's also about seeking emotional comfort as well. That when someone goes through financial crises, or relational troubles, or various other situations of difficulty and pain and hardship, maybe grief and the loss of life, we hope and we want and we desire for our surrounding people to flood us and cover us and cloak us in their comfort. But sometimes in life, we don't receive the comfort that we need while traversing an uncomfortable world. It might be because sometimes people with good motives and well-intended meaning, they say things that actually don't bring comfort but bring more harm. Or it might not be that, but it might be that some people are just oblivious to the circumstances you're a part of and they don't bring the comfort that you have. Or it might be one thing or another. But sometimes we as humans fail to provide or give or receive the comfort that we so desperately need. But one thing that brings me a lot of peace is knowing that even when humans fail to give comfort in an uncomfortable world, we have a God who promises to deliver comfort to us and for us. And the reason I believe that and hold so tightly to that, and the reason we can say that that is true, is because of various moments in time, one of these being a life story we'll look at today. The life story of a mother who needed comfort. We are being transported back to about 4,000 years ago, where a husband and wife, a husband named Abram and a wife named Sarai, are called by God to leave their homeland and travel to the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan becomes a land that God promises to Abram and Sarai. And he also promises to them that if they are faithful to him and they follow him, that they are promised that if they go to the land of Canaan, that they will receive and have a child, a son. And that son would be born and would expand to a large family, a family that would end up blessing the other nations. But there's a little bump in the road in that Abram and Sarai are old, like really, really old. They are well beyond childbearing years, and they never were able to have a child as they got older. But God still promises them that they will have a son, that by miraculous means he would bring about them a son that would be born, and this son would become a multitude. And so Abram and Sarai, they wait for God to fulfill his promises. They wait to have a child. And they wait, and they wait, and they wait. But that child never arrives. Sarai never gets pregnant. God never fulfills his promise. And eventually, after so much waiting and waiting and waiting, Abram and Sarai decide enough's enough. We're going to take matters into our own hands. We're going to speed up the process. We're going to make this happen now. And that's where our story picks up. So if you have a Bible and you want to join along and see where this story takes us, we'll be in Genesis chapter 16 today. Again, that's Genesis chapter 16. Here's how the chapter begins. It says this: Abram's wife Sarai had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, "Since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family." And Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife for him. This happened after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan 10 years. So Abram and Sarai, they wait a long time. They wait 10 years. They wait 10 years for God to give them this child. They wait 10 years to get pregnant. And finally, after waiting and waiting and waiting and it never happening, Sarai says, okay, we're going to make this happen now. If not through me, then through my slave Hagar. Hagar's from Egypt, but the name Hagar is Hebrew. The name Hagar means resident alien or the foreigner. More than likely, this wasn't her original name, but it was a name given to her when she became a slave as a way to further dehumanize her. You see, Hagar is, in this situation, really, this conversation between Sarai and Abram brings about some uncomfortable and maybe weird questions and ideas. Starting with the idea that Hagar is a slave. She is someone else's property, that she has been stripped of her agency and she has been dehumanized lower and lower and lower to be considered property, where she has no control over what she can or can't do. Where she is forced into a marriage that she has no say in whether or not she will be. Where she is forced to have sex with someone, whether or not she wants to or not. And as we hear this picture, for us seeing this in our modern lens, that brings a lot of major concerns and questions about Hagar and about the dynamic of being a slave and someone else's property. But we have to probably understand first and foremost that this, regardless of whether it was right or wrong, was a cultural normative of the day. That this was normatively practiced during this time period. But that doesn't necessarily make it right either. In fact, God doesn't even endorse this in this story at all. He is silent at this point in the narrative. But this is what ends up happening. The second thing that's kind of a weird or uncomfortable detail here is that Sarai is expecting to build her family through Hagar, which is kind of odd that she's expecting Hagar to have her son, because we know how in modern biology how reproduction works. How for a child to come to fruition and to have the DNA it needs, a child will have part of the mother and part of the father come together to create the child. That the DNA comes from both the mom and the dad. But in this culture, that is not how reproduction was understood or thought of. They had a very different way because they didn't have access to the data and understanding of modern biology that we have. So in this ancient world, the way that they thought reproduction took place was that the male had a seed that they would give to a woman, and the woman basically was effectively an incubator. That's often how it was described how historians often describe that idea. And so if if Sarai was a failed incubator to effectively reproduce, well, maybe another incubator would do, that being Hagar. And so in this situation, Hagar is effectively a surrogate mother in the context of how this is all working. And so they see Hagar going to have their child, and then it would end up growing to be theirs. So we have this really weird and maybe even uncomfortable passage here of something odd happening. And that's what happens. Hagar, she gets married to Abram, but even though she's technically his wife, she is also technically going to be considered a concubine, which means that she will have less status than the matriarch Sarai, and she will also still be considered Sarai's slave. It goes on, and Hagar eventually gets pregnant. Perhaps or likely in a much shorter span of time than when Sarai struggled to get pregnant. And then what we find out is that we would think that this is a joyous occasion, that finally gets a son or potentially a son, I don't even know the gender yet, that a child will be born and potentially a son, and that God's plan and promises can finally step forward and go forward. But when Hagar is pregnant, things don't go the way that you would maybe expect. This is what the text says in verse 4. It says this: he slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. When she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became contemptible to her. So Hagar is pregnant, and maybe she gets a little excited, and maybe she's a little joyous about this, because for her to be having a child of the patriarch, Abram, that would be good news for her. It means that her and her child should be treated well and taken care of for moving forward. And maybe for her, she's thinking, finally, maybe something in my life can start to change now. Finally, maybe my situation can finally start to get a little bit better. But the problem is, as she is pregnant and as her baby bump starts to get larger and larger, Sarai starts to be contemptible towards her. Now, some people, they think that the reason that, they speculate in that maybe the reason Sarai is contemptible towards Hagar is because Hagar is kind of flaunting her pregnancy. That she's boasting to Sarai's face and kind of rubbing it in her face. Look at me, I have a child, I'm pregnant, and look at you couldn't even do that, even though you're the gray old wife of Abram. But I'm not sure if that's a good reading of what's happening here. I think that's a reading that's trying to paint Sarai as the pious, good person in this story, while Hagar is still the kind of downtrodden, maybe bad guy in this story. But what the problem I have with that reading is that when we see Sarai in this story, she's very selfish. She's trying to take control of the situation and force things to go how she wants. She's not necessarily supposed to be in the picture that we paint her. So I think something else is happening here and why Sarai holds contempt against Hagar. I think what happens is that Hagar, as she is pregnant and starting to bear and carry the child of Abram, Sarai sees all that happening, and she's reminded that she spent decades and decades trying to get pregnant and failed. And by seeing Hagar in a very short period of time get pregnant, she is reminded about her own brokenness. And as she's wrestling and dealing with that, the emotions that carries, it comes out as bitterness and contempt towards the person that's close to her. And it leads Sarai actually to go up to Abram and go, why have you caused this suffering to me? Why did you go and get her pregnant? And Abram, he's thinking to himself, because you told me to. That's what it says. That's what Sarah says, but Abram doesn't actually say that. He's smarter than that. Abram actually doesn't say something much better, though, in the next verse. What Abram says to her is basically, she's your slave, your problem. You deal with it. Abram, in this weird polygamous culture, he fails to be the protective husband towards his wife Hagar in this moment, and instead just raises his hands and just gives all responsibility to Sarai. And in doing that, Hagar is not treated well. And it leads Hagar to taking action of herself. This is what the text says. If you go down to the end of verse 6, it says this: Then Sarai mistreated her so much that she ran away from her. Sarai, in it being the master, the mistress of the slave, she decides to take matters in her own hands. And in her contempt, in her bitterness, in her frustration towards Hagar being pregnant, she starts to mistreat her. Now, what does this mistreatment look like? The text does not say. We can only speculate. Perhaps the reason the type of mistreatment that was happening was verbal and emotional mistreatment. That maybe Sarai kept saying to her, "You're just that no good slave. Remember your place. You know, you're going to have this child, and that child's going to be mine, and you're going to go back to the way you were before. You're never going to be more than under me." Maybe that's how she treats. She just emotionally and verbally just mistreats Hagar. Or maybe it's not that, but maybe it's physical mistreatment. Like maybe as Hagar gets more and more pregnant, maybe she's into her second trimester at this point, and as she gets more and more pregnant, Sarai does not slow down the physical manual labor that she's requiring Hagar to do, things that maybe a heavily pregnant lady should not be doing. Whatever it is, Hagar feels so mistreated at this point that enough is enough. She can't handle it anymore. She has endured it long enough, and so she flees. She runs away. Hagar, she flees into the wilderness, which is southwest of the land of Canaan. What Hagar's trying to do is she's trying to flee back to her homeland, to return back to Egypt. But to go from Canaan to Egypt meant that you had to traverse the wilderness. And the wilderness was not a pleasant experience. It was full of wild beasts. It was hot. It was arid. It was rocky. Water was only here or there. This was not a good place for a pregnant woman to try and go through. And things would likely not end well for her if she tried to keep going and going to Egypt. But for her, she felt like it was the last straw. She felt like it was her only desperate hope left. And so we can picture Hagar here. Hagar, who has been dehumanized for years. Hagar, who has been mistreated for weeks, if not months. Hagar, who feels alone, who feels isolated. The term uncomfortable is probably too kind of a term for how she felt. Hagar is at her lowest, most desperate, most distraught point. And she's in a situation where no one is giving her the comfort that she so desperately needs. But it's in the wilderness where she finally hears a voice of comfort come to her. Here's what the text says if you go down to verse 7. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. He said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" She replied, "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai." We see the angel of the Lord appear before Hagar. There's a lot of speculation on who or what the angel of the Lord is in the Old Testament. He's a character that pops up over and over in the Bible. We can't go into this speculation. I would love to, but we just don't have time. It seems like, in this case at least, that the angel of the Lord is either a representative of God, could be a title for God, or it could be a messenger of God that is speaking with the authority on behalf of God. Regardless, we are supposed to see the angel of the Lord and God kind of as one and the same as we read this story. So as we continue on here, what we see first is something really interesting here. That God, he comes before Hagar and he calls her by her name. That he knows her, he knows who she is, and she's not going to be just seen as just some object or item of property. And then before he gives her any command or any instruction or anything else, before any of that, what God does to her is he seeks to ask a question. He wants to hear her story. He listens to her. And Hagar says, I'm running away from my master, my mistress named Sarai. And maybe the biblical author here, maybe he condenses down the story a little bit to that one line, but maybe Hagar's explanation was a bit longer. Maybe she went into detail about what was going on. She said, I've been a slave under Sarai for several years, and ever since I was forced to marry Abram, and ever since I became pregnant with this child, ever since then, Sarai has been bitter and frustrated towards me. And she started mistreating me terribly. She mistreated me so much that I couldn't handle it anymore. I had to run away. And maybe as she's talking and describing her situation, the tears are welling up in her eyes. But whatever is happening here, Sarai has given the chance to share her story with God. That God has come to her in the middle of the wilderness, attentive to her cries. After God hears her, after he listens, God has a command for her. He calls for her to do something, and it is shocking. It might be unexpected to our modern ears. Here's what he says. He says this: "The angel of the Lord said to her, 'Go back to your mistress and submit to her authority.'" And that seems really shocking to us, because what it sounds like and what God is telling her to do is to go back to Sarai and submit to her. Return to your abuser and let her continue to mistreat you. Continue to the one who dehumanizes you, who has no care for you, who only sees you as an incubator for her child. Just go on back, Hagar. And for us, as we hear that it seems to go against our moral intuitions. And we wonder why the God of the Bible would be like this if he is a good God. But as we take a pause and we think about this carefully, perhaps there are some reasonable explanations for this. Maybe first off, Hagar returning back to Abram and Sarai would probably be the wisest, healthiest choice in this situation. That she would not be able to survive in the wilderness pregnant on her own. There's no way she'd be able to make it to Egypt on her own. There's no way that the child would be able to survive this. She had the best case of living. She had the best case of her child living if she returned back to Abram and Sarai. But the other thing that is also happening here, it's really interesting, is that by calling for her to return to Sarai, what God is doing is he's giving Hagar a little bit of her agency back in this moment, where he's calling for Hagar in her own free choice and her own will to go back and willingly come back under Sarai's authority. That he's giving her the ability to do that by her own will. And if she does that, God has a promise for her. If she returns back to Sarai, God has this beautiful promise in store. That she should return to Sarai so that this can happen. This is what God says. The angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly multiply your offspring, and they will be too many to count. And then he says this in verse 11, the angel of the Lord said to her, you have conceived and will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your cry of affliction. And many of your Bibles will have a footnote there where the term Ishmael means God hears. This man, and then it goes on and describes Ishmael and what will happen after that. But what I want us to listen in here at this moment is that Hagar is promised that her child will be born healthy. And not only will it be a child, but this will be a son, which is a big deal in this culture. You got to understand that in this time period, in this culture, they did not have the medical advancements and capabilities that we do today. And so to go through labor and delivery was a very concerning process, and that not every child survived the birthing process. That was somewhere like between 30 and 50% of births did not, the baby would not survive. Not only that, but she's promised that her son would grow to be a full adult, which means that he would survive some of the most difficult early years of childhood, where the mortality rate would increase dramatically until you were like 4 or 5 years old as a child. And so this was a really beautiful and comforting promise to Hagar, that not only would she have a child, but she would have a son, and that this son would live to be an adult. And not only that, but this son would have an expansive family as well, which is an amazing, beautiful picture for this mother in the middle of the wilderness, uncertain about what's going to be happening. And God calls for her to have this son and name this son Ishmael, which is a name that means God hears. That every time that Hagar would look to Ishmael, anytime that she saw her son, anytime she said his name, she would be reminded of the moment when God came to her in the wilderness and heard her cries of affliction. And she'd be reminded and have a lifelong testament of the comfort that God brings her. And as a response to that beautiful promise, as a response to hearing this from God, she does something unique. Here's what she does. Verse 13. So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roi." For she said, "In this place have I actually seen the one who sees me?" That is why the well is called Be'er Lahai Roi, which, if you go to your footnote, if you have one, it can be translated, "Well of the living one who sees me." It is between Kadesh and Bered. You see, throughout the Bible, and in particular the Old Testament, God goes by all sorts of titles that people prescribe to him. For example, he's called Almighty God at one point. He's called the Lord my Shepherd at one point. He even reveals his personal name to Moses in the burning bush moment. But out of everywhere in the Old Testament, this is the one and only place where someone names God. And it was an enslaved woman named Hagar who gives God a name. She gives God the name El Roi, a name that means the God who sees me. Or the seeing God is another way you could translate it. That this God, in his grace and mercy and comfort, encountered and drew near to Hagar in the wilderness. And from this point forward, this is the name that she will call upon God. She will call upon El Roi in her times of distress, in times of her uncertainty, in times of uncomfortability, to be reminded of him. And friends, the amazing thing is that just like God is El Roi for Hagar, God is El Roi for us as well. That our God the God we worship is not a God who plugs his ears up and says, "Stop crying, get over it." He's not the guy who turns a blind eye and just ignores us when we are in difficulty and distress. This is a God who draws near to us in uncomfortable times. He is the God who leans to us whenever we need it most. He is the God who sees. And I'm reminded of a children's song that I remember growing up when I was going to Sunday school, where the song lyrics go, "Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. For our Father up above is looking down on us, so be careful, little eyes, what you see." And it goes on through other actions, like be careful, little ears, what you hear. Be careful, little hands, what you do. Like you can go through all the different actions. What the message giving there is, you better be good when you're in public, and you better be good in private, because even when no one's looking, your God up above, your Father above, is going to look down on you. And if you don't do the right thing, well, you might get in some trouble. It's really a song that produces fear in kids. Is that what the name El Roi means? Is that what Hagar means? No. El Roi, that name is not meant to produce fear in us. It's meant to produce comfort in us. That our God, El Roi, he draws near to us when we need it. He cares for us. God, he sees your tears and he hears your cries. And he draws near in comfort, even when those around us do not provide the comfort we need. When McCall and I got married, we wanted to have kids early on. I've shared this story before, but some of you may be unfamiliar. And for years, we struggled with infertility, where we were just not able to have a child. But then one day, after various fertility treatments, we ended up having a successful pregnancy through one of the treatments. But a couple weeks into that pregnancy, we realized that it was not flourishing like it should be. And we were told to go to the fertility clinic. We went there. They did an ultrasound, and it turns out that the pregnancy was ectopic, which means that the fertilized egg had implanted itself into the fallopian tube rather than the uterus, which means that the baby could not survive. It would be a risk to McCall if the baby continued to grow. And that led to a really big period of grieving for us as a family. But throughout our time, we felt like it was really important to be public and to destigmatize some of the tabooness of infertility and the pregnancy elements. And so when we were going through infertility, McCall and I, we were very public about it with people because we felt like as a church family, we needed to come together and be with each other and make it public so other people can see that they struggle and we can be with each other in the struggle. And then when we were pregnant, we shared that with our church and with other people, and we wanted to be celebratory and celebrate with our people with that. And we were public about that. And so when it came to us having the ectopic pregnancy and the baby not surviving, we also were public about that. And we were hoping that we would be cloaked in comfort as we were grieving alongside other people. And while that happened with some people, there were also many people, some family members and close friends who didn't really provide the comfort that we needed. They had really well and good meaning intentions, but they weren't quite saying things that were bringing comfort. And instead, it actually caused the opposite, where some people would say things like, all in God's plan and God's timing. Or they would say things like, well, at least you know you can get pregnant now. Good intentions and well-meaning people. But those types of phrases and terms actually brought more harm. And it caused a lot of stinging in the moment of grieving the loss of a child. And so during that season, what brought us the most comfort and what helped us through that grieving process was planting our feet in the quiet knowing that our God is one who brings comfort. That our God is one whose heart aches when he sees his people feeling the profound brokenness of our sin-corrupted world. That our God, we believed and could hold tight to, that our God was El Roi. And just like people like Hagar, just like experiences that we have had in our own lives in the past, we knew that our God was drawing near to us, bringing his arms around us in comfort. God, he sees your tears and he hears your cries. Our God is one who draws near in comfort in times when we desperately need it in our uncomfortable world. God, he sees your heart palpitating as you go through moments of severe anxiety and worry over the future. Our God, he sees when you are grieving at the funeral when your loved one passed away. Our God, he hears you gasp for air as you enter that panic attack once more. He hears your voice tremble as your child rejects you once again. Our God, he sees your financial crisis. He sees your marital troubles. He sees your difficult circumstance. Our God, he hears your quarrels. He hears your trauma. He hears your frustrations. Our God, he sees, he hears. God sees your tears and he hears your cries. And friends, just like Hagar, when you are in moments where you are not receiving the comfort you need in an uncomfortable world, call out to El Roi. Call out to the God who sees, because he is the God that brings comfort.